Hey everyone, I'm Minister James Moss. We're back again with continuing education. This one is entitled, we're in the book of Acts in case you're wondering. Okay, this one is entitled, Paul Meets Priscilla and Aquila in Corinth. We're in chapter 18. We're going to cover the first 17 verses. All right, so without further ado, we're just going to get right to it because it's good stuff, Maynard. All right. The spread of the gospel requires a team effort by individuals with different gifts. Some people might need to know that. In Corinth, Paul met Priscilla and Aquila, a married couple who proved to be faithful partners in the gospel. Paul's ministry in this decadent city was long and fruitful. Not even a concerted effort by the Jews could stop him from teaching the word. Wow. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 18, verses 1 through 17. And let me make sure I mark my spot because I don't want to go past it. Sometimes I'll get so wrapped up in what I'm reading, I forget where I'm supposed to stop. Y'all pray for me. All right. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came unto them. And because he was of the same craft, he abode with them and wrought, for by their occupation they were tent makers. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. And when Silas and Timothy were come from Macedonia, Paul was pressed in the spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus was Christ. And when they opposed themselves and blasphemed, he shook his raiment and said unto them, Your blood be upon your own heads. I am clean. From henceforth I will go unto the Gentiles. And he departed thence and entered into a certain man's house named Justus, one that worshipped God, whose house joined hard to the synagogue. And Crispus, the chief ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all his house, and many of the Corinthians, hearing and believed, were baptized. Then spake the Lord to Paul in the night by a vision. Be not afraid, but speak and hold not thy peace, for I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee to hurt thee, for I have much people in this city. And he continued there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. And when Gallio was the deputy of Achaia, the Jews made insurrection with one accord against Paul and brought him to the judgment seat, thus saying, This fellow persuadeth men to worship God contrary to the law. And when Paul was now about to open his mouth, Gallio said unto the Jews, If it were a matter of wrong or wicked lewdness, O ye Jews, reason what that I should bear with you. But if it be a question of words and names and of your law, look ye to it, for I will be no judge of such matters. And he drove them from the judgment seat. Then all the Greeks took Sosthenes, the chief ruler of the synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat. And Gallio cared for none of those things. Wow. Wow. Woo-wee. Okay, so here we go. Ancient Corinth had been destroyed by the Romans in 146 BC, but it had been rebuilt by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. Because of its because of its strategic seaport. I don't know why I even said tragic, but anyway, because of its strategic seaport, this became, prime property for the Romans. By Paul's day, the Romans had made Corinth the capital of Achaia, which is basically modern day Greece. Only 50 miles from Athens, Corinth by this time was regarded as the most influential city of Greece. The population was about 650,000, 250,000 free citizens and 400,000 slaves. Corinth was a major city of commerce, located on a narrow strip of land near two bustling seaports and at a busy crossroads for land travelers and traders. The city was wealthy and very materialistic. Corinth was a city of culture, though not a university town like Athens. There was great interest in Greek philosophy and wisdom. The city was permeated with religion. At least 12 temples were located there. The most infamous of these temples was dedicated to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and featured 1,000 sacred prostitutes. Another temple dedicated to Apollo employed young men whose job was to fulfill the sexual desires of male and female worshippers. Largely due to this fact, the city was notorious for its immorality. So brazen was the unbridled licentiousness that a new Greek verb was eventually coined to Corinthianize, meant to practice sexual immorality. When Plato referred to prostitute, he used the expression Corinthian girl. From a human point of view, Corinth was not the type of place where one would expect to launch a thriving ministry. But Paul did not view things from an earthly perspective. He saw Corinth as both a challenge and a great ministry opportunity. Later, he would write a series of letters to the Corinthians dealing in large part with the problems of immorality. 1st and 2nd Corinthians are two of those letters. Aquila and Priscilla had just been expelled from Rome by Claudius Caesar's order. Trained as tent makers, Aquila and Priscilla had packed up the tools of their trade and had made their way to Corinth. There they met Paul, who joined them in the business of tent making. Jewish boys were expected to learn trades from which they could earn their living, so Paul learned tent making. Tents were much in demand because they were used throughout the empire to house soldiers. Tent makers also made canopies and other leather goods. It is highly likely, therefore, that the Roman army was a major purchaser of Paul's tents. As a tent maker, Paul had a transportable livelihood that he could carry with him wherever God led him. Since ancient craftsmen did not compete as merchants do today, but rather formed cooperative trade guilds and often lived in close proximity, it is not surprising that Paul and Aquila worked together. Because many of the trade guilds had adopted pagan practices, two God-fearing artisans would have been delighted to work together. Paul chose to work to support himself during his stay in Corinth. The presence of so many religious promoters in Corinth may have added an incentive for Paul to earn his own living. Paul wanted to disassociate himself from those teachers who taught only for money. As Paul lived with Priscilla and Aquila, he must have shared with them his wealth of spiritual wisdom. They likely were already believers. Perhaps they had embraced the gospel through the ministry of the Roman natives who had been in Jerusalem at Pentecost. They may even have been founding members of the church in Rome. Verse 4, Paul never veered from his ministry philosophy. Because of his great burden for his lost Jewish brothers, Paul would go each Sabbath to the synagogue. There he would speak to both Jews and Greeks. Verse 5. Upon the arrival of his colleagues, Paul was able to set aside his tent making and devote himself to full-time preaching. Silas and Timothy must have brought with them a financial gift from the believers in Macedonia. They also brought a good word about the perseverance of the believers in Thessalonica. Paul must have been encouraged by all these factors. Some Jews in Paul's audience opposed and insulted Paul. That he shook the dust from his robe was a dramatic gesture separating him from even the dust found in such a rebellious synagogue. His pointed statement, "Your blood be upon your own heads," is a reference to the Jews' own responsibility for their eventual spiritual destruction and brings to mind the sobering warning of Ezekiel 33:4. Paul was telling the Jews that he had done all he could for them. Because they continued to reject Jesus as their Messiah, he would turn his attention to the Gentiles, who would prove to be more receptive. Verses 7 and 8. The home of Titus Justus became Paul's base of operations, and its proximity to the synagogue gave the apostle convenient and ongoing contact with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks. As the synagogue leader, Crispus would have been responsible for maintenance of the synagogue complex and the services held there. Such a position would have made him a prominent and well-to-do person in the community. Thus, his conversion was a significant breakthrough for the church. Verses 9 through 11. Apparently, the conversions of Crispus and other Corinthians, together with the formation of a growing house church right next door to the synagogue, must have provoked great controversy and opposition. But in contrast to his treatment elsewhere, no one would harm Paul. He would not endure bodily harm during this time in Corinth. As a result of this divine word of assurance, Paul spent 18 months in Corinth preaching and teaching. During that year and a half, Paul established a church and wrote 2 letters to the believers in Thessalonica. verses 12 through 13, God's promise was that Paul would not be personally harmed. This guarantee did not preclude an attack on his ministry. In time, the Jews would successfully manage to have Paul charged with promoting a religion not approved by Roman law. Such behavior amounted to treason. But Paul was not encouraging obedience to a human king other than Caesar, nor was he speaking against the Roman Empire. Instead, he was speaking about Christ's eternal kingdom. This sequence of events took place when Gallio, a brother of Seneca the philosopher, was governor of Achaia. He had come to power in AD 51 and 52, and he enjoyed a good reputation among his people as a pleasant man. Verses 14 and 15, this was an important judicial decision for the spread of the gospel in the Roman Empire. Judaism was a recognized religion under Roman law. As long as Christians were seen as a sect within Judaism, the court could refuse to hear cases brought against them. Gallio's decision proved to be extremely beneficial for the emerging Christian church for the next 10 years. His ruling became a legal precedent used in Paul's trial in Rome. If Gallio had found Paul guilty, every governor in every province where Paul or other missionaries traveled could arrest the Christians. By not ruling against Paul, the Romans were including Christianity as one of the legal religions of the Roman Empire. Gallio, in effect, helped spread the gospel throughout the empire. Verses 16 and 17, the fact that Gallio had Paul's Jewish accusers driven out of the courtroom rather than merely sent away reveals his irritation with what he evidently felt were petty, trumped-up charges. The gathered crowd, however, became unruly and erupted in violence. This mob may have been Greeks venting their feelings against the Jews for causing turmoil, or it may have included some Jews. If the latter is true, Sosthenes, the newly designated leader of the synagogue, became the focal point of the mob's anger and frustration, probably because he was seen as the one responsible for losing the case against Paul and leaving the synagogue worse off than before. A man named Sosthenes is mentioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 1, and this may be the same man. If so, he would later become a convert and a companion of Paul. All right, so this wraps up where Paul meets Aquila and Priscilla, and pretty much that year and a half of Aquila and Priscilla were driven out of Rome by edict given by Claudius Caesar, and they found their way to Corinth. Paul ended up in Corinth at the same time, and from there they built a very powerful bond and spiritual relationship, as well as brother and sisterly relationship amongst themselves and the other believers. So this one is also a great one. Take time out, go back, reread everything, understand what you're reading, and then move forward. Okay, there's no rush. Make sure you understand what you're reading and then move forward. All right, until next time, God bless you, God keep you, and always keep studying. Always keep studying. God bless you. All right, God keep you.